Hello, I'm Will Yeoman, and as mentioned in the introduction to the show today, I'm now joined by Melita Markey, who's Chief Executive Officer of Asbestos Diseases Society of Australia Incorporated, and we're in their office here in Osborne Park in Western Australia. Melita, welcome to the pod, well travelled.
Thanks, Will. Lovely to be here today.
We have some very serious topics to discuss, and first and foremost, as this is a travel podcast, is the idea that the town of Wittenoom seems to be very attractive to a lot of tourists. And I think that's largely because a lot of people don't really understand the history and the dangers of Wittenoom. So perhaps you could start by giving us the basics. Why should we just not go to Wittenoom, full stop?
Right, Will. Look, I think looking at all the social media sites and pages talking about visiting Wittenoom and encouraging others to do so, Instagram pages, Facebook pages, all looking at talking about camping and photography and even grey nomads, which we're a little bit surprised about. We were shocked to see that because the history of Wittenoom and the surrounding areas is that it's contaminated by blue asbestos, and that's the legacy left by the CSR asbestos mine there, which closed in 1966 but was never cleaned up. So huge amounts of blue asbestos tailings are dumped in between the hills there and the mountains, all through the town, the mine. Everything's just been they just walked away and left it. And people, when they lived in the town, used to put asbestos tailings on their driveways. It was substituted for white sand in the sandboxes, in playgrounds in the school. So little children grew up playing in asbestos, and sadly that's left a terrible legacy for those children and their families.
It's quite horrifying to think of now. I should have also asked you, we can't assume that everyone knows where Wittenoom is.
No, that's exactly right. Look, Wittenoom is in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. It's a couple of hours drive from Port Hedland. So it's not far, and it's also not a far drive from Karrajini National Park.
Right. Okay, there you go. So I was trying to think, why is it actually attractive in the first place for people to go there? Because you've got places like Wittenoom Gorge, haven't you?
Yeah, the fabulous gorges there. They are spectacular. And the wildflower season at the moment.
Yes.
There's a trail that goes through the Karrajini and that area, and it's not far to deviate off and have a look at Wittenoom. And even the RAC, sadly, put it in their travel book as one of their top 8 ghost towns in Australia.
I find that extraordinary, yeah.
So one of our members alerted us to that, and we actually had a conversation with the RAC, and they have made changes to that, and we've asked them to start promoting that Wittenoom is not a place to visit and to really warn people of the dangers.
Okay, so why is there still a danger this far?
Well, one of the things...
the activities that took place there.
Well, because one of the things about asbestos fibres, and in particular Wittenoom, because it was a blue asbestos fibre, there's 3 types of fibre. Now, the blue fibre is the finest and the most delicate, and it actually was the best for use in industry, say fire blankets and all the areas, fire retardation. Asbestos had a lot of uses in industry.
Yes.
So it was very sought after. And the 2 mines were in South Africa and in WA for the blue asbestos. So what happens, without it being cleaned up, there's lots of those fine, minute, very sharp fibres floating around the atmosphere, and unfortunately the fibres that lodge in our lungs and cause the mutations, we can't see them. And our air monitoring is still very unsophisticated, and it doesn't pick it up at that level. They're below 5 microns in length.
Okay, so what are some of the kinds of diseases that result if you were unfortunate enough to get one of these particles lodged in your lungs? Well,
realistically, the way the diseases work, a prolonged exposure, say working with asbestos, you're likely over time to develop asbestosis,
okay,
which is fibrosis in the lungs. But the terrible disease that we're most afraid of is mesothelioma, and that's there's no known amount of safe asbestos exposure to develop mesothelioma. So one of the things people talk about is the one fibre theory. You know, if you get that fibre lodged in your lungs, causing mutations, and particularly if you are a smoker, that would also add to the mutation. You are very much at risk of lung cancer and indeed mesothelioma.
That's extraordinary. So clearly you're still seeing cases decades on from people who might have worked in the town.
Yes, we are. And sadly, from people who just lived in the town like children, that's coming up now. Teachers who worked in the Wittenoom school, so they weren't directly involved with working in the mine and mill, where you expect they had heavy exposure. So cases aren't surprising. from occupational exposure, but it's a non-occupational exposure such as the tourism. Wittenoom races were the huge event in the Pilbara in its day, and we've had jockeys pass away. So they weren't there very long. They were just there for the race. So we're seeing a lot of that incidental, non-occupational exposure, which is really worrying us. And when I found some articles back that the West wrote back in 93, talking about 40,000 people a year visiting the region, really got us worried. And a lot of, like Hale School used to do an annual camp there, and we've had students who have developed mesothelioma.
I'm wondering too, I mean, this begs the question, how early on did they understand the dangers of working around asbestos?
Well, the dangers of working around asbestos were known in the UK in the early turn of the century.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, they observed workers working in the mills making all the asbestos products and things. As I said, it was a fantastic product for fire retardation, particularly in the Navy and the boiler rooms in ships. During the war, it was a great product. So even in gas masks. So it's been well used. So when we had a young flying doctor here, and Professor Eric Saint, he went on to found UWA's medical school for us. He was up there as a young flying doctor, and in 1948 he wrote to the health department. He was so horrified at the conditions he saw in the Wittenoom mine and mill that he wrote, the Wittenoom mine and mill, CSR mill, would produce the most lethal crop of asbestos diseases in the world's literature.
Goodness.
Now that letter was actually used later on in the cases to finally get some compensation for the victims of the Wittenoom mine. So yeah, numerous times health warnings, and finally Dr. McNulty in the health department here, he was very big on writing warnings to them. We did numerous inspections, but things just didn't change.
So the next question for me would be, is it possible to clean this mess up? And if so, why hasn't it been done?
Well, look, successive governments have looked at trying to clear it up because it is so spectacular, and there's been wonderful plans drawn up to develop the site into a resort. You know, we've got copies of those plans. And we had quotes. In 1993, there was an inquiry by the government, a report of the Select Committee appointed to inquire into Wittenoom, and it was presented by Mr. Larry Graham, JP MLA, Wednesday the 3rd of August 94. And they quoted a price of $2.6 million to clean up the town and the racetrack and the airport. But subsequent to that, I think nowadays the prices have gone much higher, and we're looking at the hundreds of millions.
Of course, hence the reticence in wanting to tackle the project now, despite the obvious beauties of the place and what it might bring to tourism if it were to happen.
Yeah, so it's been often looked at, but each time successive governments, so the government that came after this report was tabled felt that that was too expensive. And so we've just had this ping pong with dealing with Wittenoom. And I guess the issue is now, Wittenoom is known around the world. It's Australia's worst industrial disaster. Thousands of people have died from that, workers, and subsequent now more people are dying that have had the non-occupational exposure. And interestingly enough, we found articles, say in the New Zealand Herald, warning their people visiting Australia to avoid Wittenoom. We've got German tourists being warned not to travel to Wittenoom. In fact, we had a German film crew come here and focus on the greatest, Australia's greatest disaster, industrial disaster, and it's known as second in the world. But we believe that it may become the largest because it keeps on killing. And that's one of the reasons we're so keen to talk to you today, Will, is because there's a younger generation now, as we can see from Instagram, and they probably don't know about the deadly history, the deadly legacy. And often people, when they're young, don't think about things 50 years later.
Exactly.
And we're really worried about their children because children react differently with the mutation.
So you're saying there might even be cases of young families going up there?
Well, there are.
It's
We
like
can see them.
Wow, okay.
We can see
that's
them
quite
on Instagram.
frightening, isn't it?
It is very frightening because children are younger, they're closer to the ground, they'll breathe in more fibre, they're growing, gives the chance the fibre to mutate, cause more mutations. And one of the things that the school in Wittenoom has showed us is that children exposed at 5 years old die terrible deaths in their 40s and 50s from mesothelioma, and they are leaving young families. And what's more, the compensation that is available does not cover the cost of bringing up their families. which is very sad. In other states it does, but not in WA. And I often wonder the reason we don't have those laws, or they were repealed, we did have them and they were repealed, is because they are aware of the risks of Wittenoom.
So it's a terrible, terrible legacy. And it does surprise me that it seems to be more well known outside Western Australia.
I know, that's what fascinates
It's
us.
just unbelievable.
Yeah, we've had an amazing show done by Panorama in the UK. They came over and did a big show on it, warning their people. New Zealand, Germany, France. So everyone knows about this huge disaster and the number of deaths. And we have the largest biobanking of tissue from diseases, asbestos diseases in the Southern Hemisphere. So we share that with researchers around the world.
I mean, the thing that also worries me when we talk about younger tourists, there's a certain class of tourists that will deliberately seek out these kinds of dangerous or haunted or whatever places where, you know, disasters, natural or otherwise, have occurred. And I'm a bit concerned too that some of these people, this kind of information just won't discourage them.
And that's exactly right. We feel the same way because we keep seeing more. And we've been tracking this for some time. We hired an absolutely fabulous social media expert from Buzz Communications to help us track this. We've been doing it about a year now to get this anecdotal evidence because we were so concerned.
Sure.
And one of the things we thought about in deterring them was focusing a memorial, a Wittenoom memorial in Karajini itself, to having all the names. When you start seeing thousands of names and then you're leaving spaces for more names in the future, because we know we're going to get more deaths from Wittenoom, more children, more families that have sadly succumbed to it as they age and the mutations happen with them. So we feel that one of the really strong things, if you're sitting there and you're a wife with 2 children, your husband says, no, let's just go there, she'll be right. And your wife says, well, look, these thousands of names, maybe we should be looking at this.
Exactly, yes.
And I don't know if you've seen the beautiful memorial in Geraldton of the Wailing Woman with the HMS Sydney sinking off there.
No, I have actually, yes.
Yeah, they've got 650 names there on that particular memorial. And also the World Trade Center. I actually went to New York and I actually went and saw that memorial and I was absolutely blown away. In fact, when I came back from New York and talked to the people who did the Geraldton Memorial, the Smiths, I felt that it was only fitting that we have something similar, and then doing the work now with the social media, realising perhaps that is the only way we can deter those people.
I mean, it's interesting. That also brings to mind the Holocaust Memorial in Germany, which I'm not comparing the two things, but just that kind of memorial, which really hammers home the message.
Well, we actually often refer to Wittenoom as Australia's Holocaust.
Right, okay.
Because people were knowingly sent to their death.
Yes.
They knew, and it was proven in the courts.
Yes.
They knew. So that is a fitting description, I think.
Sounds like a national scandal to me.
It is, it is. And it's something that we really need to take very seriously with this new generation. And I think, as you can see, even now with the COVID, people rebelling and getting $5,000 fines, there will, as you say, there will be those people. So you have to appeal to them in a different way. Do you want to be a name on this memorial?
Yeah, it's not the kind of notoriety you actually want, is it?
Yeah, and that's what you're aiming for when you're heading there, because we don't know, we don't have the science to tell you why you'll get it and I won't, or while we have a wonderful family here where 14 members of the one family have all died from asbestos diseases. They lived in the town, the children were born in the town. This particular lady, Bronwyn Duke, she's lost her mother, father, grandparents, aunts, uncles, her brother, and she herself has pleural plaques. And pleural plaques are what happens when you appear on the lungs. They're benign, they don't cause anything, they can cause a bit of irritation. But what they do is they tell us, they are the asbestos calling card, they tell us you've been exposed.
Right.
So she said to me, Melita, the memorial is very important to her, and she said to me, Melita, I live with not knowing whether this is coming. So again, do you really want that hanging over your head psychologically, that you've gone there and whether you'll get something?
Exactly.
So that's the other side of it.
Very sobering message. So to finish up with, it's quite simple. Just don't go to Wittenoom.
Don't go. Yeah, that's it. The only way we'll stop asbestos diseases in this particular cohort is don't visit Wittenoom. And if you want to stop it with around the house, don't renovate unless you've got expert advice that you haven't got asbestos around your house. It's really preventable.
And now you've got a website too, if people wanted to find out more about this, to visit asbestosdiseases.org.au.
Yes. Or our Facebook page.
Facebook page, yes.
Asbestos Disease Society. And also, really importantly, if you could go to change.org
Okay.
/Wittenoom
Yes.
Memorial.
Yes.
And please sign our petition to have a Wittenoom Memorial. Very important.
Absolutely.
It'll save lives, I believe, ironically.
Fantastic. Well, Melita Markey, thank you so much for your time. As I said, it's a very important and sobering message, and we need to get the word out to as many people as possible.
Thanks, Will.